Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. It's the weekly by-election roundup as always, but just before we get into that, we are now into November 2025, which means we are just 6 months away from the 2026 local elections in England and of course the parliamentary the parliamentary elections for Scotland and Wales. So we're going to start doing our preview videos for those, and we're going to be looking at Wales, we'll be looking at Scotland, we'll be looking at various regions and cities of England, and previewing sort of the lay of the land as it stands at the moment, what we expect to happen, and in certain places forecasting how those parliaments and councils are going to look after polling day. Look, I'm open to your guys' feedback as well. I'd be interested to hear what you guys want to see as part of this preview series, but that's going to be kicking off this week. I think we'll start by looking at the Welsh Assembly elections 2026, because of course we just had the Caerphilly election last week, by-election, so it's kind of fresh in the mind, and I think Wales will be one of the most historic election results in UK history, certainly in modern history. So we're going to start off with Wales, I think, and I'm planning on that coming out on Tuesday. So if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss that. And like I say, please do get involved in the comments on this video and future videos with things that you would like to see as part of that preview build up to the local elections next year. Right, we will get into the by-elections from this week then, and there's a bit of a smorgasbord of people winning and holding this week, and you can see we're going to start off with a somewhat unusual Conservative win. They've held on to their own seat in Hendon, and look, it's a good result for the Conservatives, to be fair. They basically maintained their vote share, lost 2.5%, but essentially that they've maintained their vote share from before. A very high winning percentage share. They're up towards 50%. So look, a good result for the Conservative Party. Look, it's a hold, and like we said in the brief preview of these by-elections last week, it is a constituency, parliamentary constituency, that the Conservatives are still actually winning, one of the few that they are still projected to win in. So perhaps not that surprising to see the Conservatives hold on here, but at the moment, the state that party's in, any sort of win is a good result. Obviously, good for Reform as well, straight in at 30.2% of the vote, but, you know, 16-point win for the Conservatives here is a good result. Turnout here, 25%, so a little bit down on what we've seen in recent weeks. So, look, good result for the Conservatives. It's the only good result for them this week, but I'm sure, like I say, in the state they're in at the moment, they will take that. We shall move on to Stevenage. Now, like I said, I thought Stevenage would be a battle between either Labour and Reform and Labour and Lib Dem, depending on the ward sort of demographics and what have you, and it turned out it was Reform, and Reform have supplanted Labour here in Stevenage. They've come in with a very respectable, again, as we're used to seeing at this point, Reform in at 39.2% of the vote, having not stood here before. That's enough to beat Labour, who did come in second, but lost 12 points off their vote. So they won it last time with a similar vote share to what Reform have won there, around 39%. Yeah, so look, again, Reform beating Labour, proving, as if anybody needs it proved anymore, that it's not just Reform, the Tories losing at the expense of Reform. Labour very much are victims of Reform's success as well now. 12-point margin of victory for them, so not a romp home, but a decent winning margin for them, over 10%. And again, 25.8% turnout here in Stevenage is a little bit down on what we have seen recently. But look, a good result for Reform. I think they needed a few wins, because obviously the last few weeks has been the Liberal Democrats have done quite well, and that's largely to do with where the seats have been falling for by-elections. And like I said last week, I thought Stevenage was a good opportunity for Reform, and they have managed to pinch this one off of Labour. Moving on to Scotland, and as always, I have to preface it and say I'm sorry I don't have much to sort of add analysis-wise, because I'm just not, it's not because I don't care about it, it's just because I don't feel like I have the knowledge to really speak too much about local politics in Scotland. But I'm doing my best to educate myself as we go, but until I'm a bit more confident, I can't add too much. But the long and short of it is, Conservatives were defending. The SNP have won that seat off of the Conservatives. I believe this is a 3-councillor ward, and now all 3 of the councillors are of the SNP. It was all a bit funny, and so if we look at the vote share changes, because it's done on the single transferable vote proportional system, so it doesn't really match up. But essentially the SNP have beaten. I think the more interesting thing to come out of this is that with Labour on 23.9% and Reform on 23.3%, Reform within touching distance of Labour in sterling, which is very concerning for Labour with those with the whole Holyrood election coming up next year. That is a bit worrying for them, and that's what we've seen in Scotland a lot across most parts of Scotland is SNP, Labour, and Reform as the main three. The Conservatives are falling away in Scotland, and Reform are slowly but surely catching up to Labour in second place. So look, as of course, it's going to be part of the preview video when we get round to looking at Scotland. So again, if you haven't yet, please do subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss that in the future, because we're going to be looking at that. We'll move on to Garling. I think it's probably Garling. I think I said Garlinge last week. I think it's probably Garling. Garling ward in Thanet. Now look, Reform gain off of a localist party. Not particularly surprising this. Obviously, it is an area of the country where UKIP used to do very well. So, and I did say last week in the preview, I thought Reform would do well. And they did. 44.6% of the vote. Very impressive, having not stood here before. A clear 12.5 margin of victory. Again, in all fairness, not a romp home, but comfortable enough. Conservatives in second place, they actually increased their vote share by 10 points. Which is, we don't see much of these days, Conservative vote share going up. So actually not a bad showing by the Conservatives there. But Reform quite clearly out ahead. Turnout, 781. I forgot to actually calculate the percentage. And by the magic of editing, I just very, very quickly did a calculation. I didn't use the exact number, but it's around about 26% turnout here in Garling. So again, a little bit down on what we have seen recently. But look, Reform gaining in Thanet is not, like I say, it's kind of expected. Now, it from where, like I have said this a few times, but from where we were, a year ago, 18 months ago in particular, after the general election, we couldn't really have said anywhere was a nailed on Reform win, but we can now, and that's how much the landscape has changed in a relatively short space of time. There are parts of the country where it would be very, very surprising to not see Reform win seats. So look, that's a credit to them and their success over the last year or so, but this isn't a surprise. Reform gaining a seat on Thanet Council. So the last couple for this week, St John's Ward, Tunbridge Wells Council. I thought the Liberal Democrats would do very well, and they have. They were defending. They've held on to their seat, increased their vote share slightly. They're over 50% of the vote. A massive margin of victory of 38 points. Nobody else really even close. 28 points again. 28% again for the turnout. So interesting this week. Pretty much all of the turnouts below 30%, which is quite interesting. Look, there's not too much to say here. And look, whether the Liberal Democrats do well, they do very, very well. That's how they operate. They're very good at building up big, big leads in areas where they can really focus their support from their base. I think the one thing the Liberal Democrats aren't doing very well at the moment is they just don't have wide appeal across the country. And, you see that in the opinion polls, despite the sort of chaos in the Tories and the fall from grace of Labour, the Liberal Democrats don't really benefit in a national opinion polling. Now, in local elections, they're doing very, very well. So there's obviously a disconnect there. And they are very, very good at campaigning. And that shows certainly in these local elections and such. So look, like I say, all to say, not surprised to see the Liberal Democrats win in Tunbridge Wells. The last one for this week, Bromsgrove South, Worcestershire. I said Reform defending. I said there's a chance they'll probably lose this. And like I said, aren't the Liberal Democrats very, very good at campaigning, because they increased their vote share from just May this year, when this seat was last elected, increased by 20 points to over 50%. So they've knocked the Reform Party out of Bromsgrove South. This was a resignation due to ill health. Turnout here was 30%, and a comfortable margin of victory, considering Reform won this seat just a few months ago. The Liberal Democrats now have an 18-point margin of victory over them. So, a bad result for Reform to be beaten that convincingly in a ward that they won just a few months ago. Now, their vote share actually didn't go down that much. Essentially, they maintained their vote share. Now, look, Reform have largest party status in Worcestershire as of May this year. But the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party both did quite well in that county too. So it wasn't one of these counties that went very, very decisively to Reform, like Lincolnshire or Kent. But I do think it's a disappointment for Reform to lose that convincingly in a ward that they won recently. But like I say, look, the Liberal Democrats are very, very good at what they do, and I think that's shown in this result there. So look, another good week for the Liberal Democrats. It was a good week for Reform, although they lost here. They did gain another 2 seats as well this week. So look, those are the two main parties, aren't they? They're the two that we talk about every single week. Liberal Democrats and the Reform Party, and every now and again the Conservatives and Labour get an honorary mention. Obviously, this week was actually a fairly decent result for the Conservatives, maintaining that vote share up in Barnet. But every week, isn't it? The story is basically Liberal Democrats and Reform gaining, Labour and the Conservatives losing. And I think what's very telling is how in many of these races we don't even talk about the Conservatives and Labour. They don't tend to even really feature all that much, and if they do feature, we're kind of talking about how much their vote share has declined. So look, the two main parties are in a crisis, and I think they're dying out. I've said this before. Those two parties are just being replaced slowly but surely by Reform and the Liberal Democrats, and also potentially the Green Party. And so, just before we start looking ahead to next week, I just want to have a very, very quick look at a poll that came out this week. So look, here it is. This is the poll I want to talk about. And look, we have to go with the caveat this is just one poll. And just to put it out there, I don't think this is necessarily what would happen. I don't necessarily agree with the total accuracy of this poll. But what's the outstanding thing that I'm sure you can see is the Green Party in second place in national polling. Now, that's something that's never been seen before. This is by far the highest the Greens have ever polled at nationally. And Labour down in fourth place, well, tied on with the Conservatives, I suppose, for third. Both of the two main parties on 16%. Now, why do I not necessarily think this is... not true is the wrong word. Why don't I think it's accurate? Well, perhaps I'm wrong, but in all fairness, Find Out Now led the way with Reform surge. So perhaps this is accurate, because Find Out Now were the first pollsters that showed Reform surging into the 20% last year. They were kind of mocked. And sure enough, that all the other pollsters started to follow them. So perhaps the same will happen here. I suppose, and I'm speaking purely from personal experience, I don't see the same kind of enthusiasm for sort of Zach Polanski and green, frankly far left communist politics as I do from people who support Reform, who are becoming much more bold in saying, frankly, I just want my country back to be something more recognisable to what I know it to be. Now, that's just me speaking from my own experience, so that's very, very heavily, influenced by just who I speak to and who I come across. But I wouldn't be surprised if this is somewhat accurate, because, and I've said it before in the past, the left wing Labour vote will not hang around with Labour forever, because they're getting very, very frustrated and they're looking for a new home. Now, obviously, we've got the Greens. Perhaps they will be the ones to take that vote away. We've also got this Jeremy Corbyn, Your Party, which, we don't know if it's actually going to happen at the moment, but it's in the works. There are a lot of vultures circling on Labour's left wing. And look, if the Greens can make hay, that may well spell the end of the Labour Party, and the two main parties, Conservatives and Labour, may well be on their deathbed. And it's starting to look that way. It really is starting to look that way. If we just go and look across at what those numbers would do in terms of a general election, look, Reform get a pretty healthy majority of 389 or 389 seats. Labour reduced to 34 from their historic majority this year, which is incredible. The Conservatives down to 21, which is becoming quite a common sight in these election projections. Liberal Democrats don't change, and that's what I was saying earlier about I don't really think the Liberal Democrats have that much national appeal at the moment. They do very, very well where they're good, but outside of that, they don't tend to be too popular. And the Greens on 57 would be very close to being the opposition, and that's a threat to the Liberal Democrats, who are just ahead still here. But the Green Party have an obvious repository of future votes, which is disaffected Labour voters, whereas the Liberal Democrats don't have that. So let's have a quick look at just what a disaster scene it is for Labour when the Green Party vote share is increasing like this poll shows it to be. So look, there's a long list here. We're not going to go into great detail on them, but just look at these seats. And so the Greens winning there on the right, and the red tab on the left shows the party that they would be winning them off, and that's Labour. So look, as we just scroll through these, you see the Greens spelling utter disaster for the Labour Party across England, and particularly in London. And so this is why I think it's worth looking at this, because we've got those London elections coming up next year, the London council elections, borough council elections, and I think the Greens could really, really hammer the Labour Party across London and indeed Manchester, Liverpool, these areas also coming up for election next year. So Labour have got the problem of reform across vast swathes of the country. They've also got a big, big, big problem with the Greens now. And look, Zach Polansky, whatever you think about him, he is a charismatic guy. He, he says things with his chest. You may not agree with it, but it generates support. It generates fervour. It gets people behind him. So he's a danger. He's a big danger for Labour. And if they can actually pull off this surge in the polls, if that can translate into a real tangible election victory next year in the local elections, Labour are going to be in huge, huge trouble. So I just wanted to have a look at that. Look, like I say, it is one poll. It's just one poll that's kind of out there at the moment. But we'll see in the coming weeks and months if other pollsters start to catch up and show Greens indeed surging up above Labour, which would be incredible. The Greens are definitely having a surge right now, but we haven't really seen any of the by-elections the Greens doing particularly well. So it's not translating into the ballot box at the moment. But can they do it? Well, that's going to be the big, big question, isn't it? All right, then, just before we finish the video, let's have a look at the by-elections happening next week, which we'll cover. Try and get a video out on Friday when I can, but it may be at the weekend like this one is. And there's a whole host again, and on weird days next week, we've got a by-election in Burnley on Tuesday, which is very, very odd. But two wards having a by-election in Burnley next week. Labour defending both. Look, I think they're in trouble. I think they're in big, big trouble. Burnley, if you look back 10 years ago, was a solid Labour council. Now it's not. It's run by independents. It's going to very much depend on the demographics of these wards as to who does well. I think Reform have a very, very good chance. But also there's independent standing. And if those independents are of the pro-Gaza style, I think they may well have a very good chance, again, depending on the demographics of the wards that we're looking at. I think Queensgate in particular, you can see there, look, this will be it's a multi-councillor ward, so Labour obviously won a councillor last time with 20% of the vote, but two of them are independents and they won almost 70% of the vote. So I wouldn't be surprised to see an independent win in Queensgate, and we'll have a look, but I'm sure it will be of the pro-Gaza variety if that happens. So look, Labour in huge, huge problem. We've just spoken about the problems they have with the Greens. They've got problems with the pro-Gaza, frankly, Islamists, and they've got problems from Reform as well. So we'll wait and see who comes out on top there. But I think Labour in big, big trouble in Burnley. Fife, again, I don't have too much to say. It'll be interesting to see who comes where in the order. SNP, I assume, probably our favourites here to win, looking at the previous vote shares. And again, it's all funny because of STV. But we'll see where Reform come in relation to those two parties as well. Fleckney Ward in Harborough, that's in Leicestershire. So obviously Reform have a minority administration in Leicestershire on the county council as of May this year. But Harborough, the two divisions or a couple of divisions in Harborough for the county council did vote Conservative and Liberal Democrat. So Reform may well have a shout. I don't know what this ward in particular is like, but I know Harborough itself was kind of Tory and Lib Dem, so probably one of those two. And you can see last time Tories won with 32%, Lib Dems not too far behind on 26%, so wouldn't be surprised to see a Liberal Democrat victory there. There's also a couple in Newark and Sherwood up in Nottinghamshire, and again, Nottinghamshire, an area of the country where Reform did phenomenally well in May in the county council elections. They're standing in both of these as well, so they would think they've got a pretty good shot here. Independents defending both, which always makes things a bit interesting. There's no independent standing in Balderton North and Coddington, but there is two independents standing in Castle Ward, so that may swing the Castle vote slightly, depending on who those independents are, how popular they are, what they stand for, etc. But you fancy Reform here. Also, the Conservatives, Newark is Robert Jenrick's constituency. It was one of the constituencies they managed to hold on to for quite a while in the nowcast. It is now going to Reform, as has been for a number of months. But look, it is an area of the country, or it is an area of the country where the Conservatives managed to hold on to some popularity for a little while. But it'll be interesting to see how much vote share they can win up there in Nottinghamshire next week. We've also got South Derbyshire. Again, Derbyshire, another area. So look, next week could be a big week for Reform. It could be. If they don't win many of these, is that a bad week for Reform? Well, it's difficult to say because, like I say, I don't know the specifics of these wards. But look, we're talking Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire, Derbyshire. Like I said, the Leicestershire one I think will go Liberal Democrat, but Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire, these are areas of the country where Reform did very, very well just a few months ago. So you know, you would back them to do well in these places. It's a Labour defence, but you can see the Independents got 51%, so it'll be a multi-council award again, where the Labour Party managed to win a council of 26% of the vote. There is an independent standing again as well, so we'll see what influence that has. But again, you feel that Reform have a good shout there in Seals. Lastly, I've said there's a whole host next week. We're going to be busy looking at all these. There's two in Tandridge down here in Surrey. Localist defending in Lingfield and Crowhurst, and there's a localist standing, and there is a number of these of this localist party on this council, so I wouldn't put it past them to defend that successfully. Actually, otherwise we'd probably be looking at the Liberal Democrats doing quite well, although they didn't do too well in this election last year when it was last up. So that'll be interesting to see. I would probably back the localists, to be honest with you, because like I say, there are a number of them on Tandridge Council. The other one is Westway, Conservatives defending, and look, you can see it was almost a three-way split in terms of the vote share, everyone getting around about a third of the vote. Liberal Democrats actually did get 42 or 43%. So defending is Conservatives, though. Again, another multi-council award where they've obviously won a council of 29% of the vote. I would expect the Liberal Democrats to probably win this, but we will have to wait and see. The last one next week is Oakhampton South in West Devon. Now, this one is a three-way split pretty much. Look, 34%, 35%, and 30% for the three parties that stood last time. It's Greens defending, but Greens aren't standing in this time round. So it's just Liberal Democrats, an Independent, and a Tory. So I would say, based off of those candidates, I would probably back the Liberal Democrats. We saw them win a couple in Devon last week, and they are doing well in Devon, as are Reform, but they're not standing here. It's just difficult to project a Conservative win at the moment. I know they won one this week, holding on to a seat, but it's difficult to see them gaining off people. So I think probably Liberal Democrat, possibly the Independent, again, depending on who that person is and what sort of policies they espouse. So that is next week, and you can see there's a whole host. I didn't even count how many there were, but there's loads next week to get into. Obviously, some are going to be out, the results will be out on Wednesday, but I'll do all of them as one video on the Friday after the bulk of them are done on the Thursday. So please do come and join me next week. And again, remember, we're going to have the preview videos for the local elections and the National Assembly elections starting next week. On Tuesday is the plan for looking our first look at a preview of the Welsh Assembly election for the Senedd next year. So please do come and join the channel, hit the notification bell. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.